Hey, thanks for tuning in today. I'm glad you're back here. I have an exciting guest today. Her name is Orly Zeewy, and she is an author and a speaker and an educator. She's a facilitator of light bulb moments. I love that picture, that image, and makes the fuzzy clear. And she helps with businesses with their messaging, so that they can attract the right clients and scale faster. Well, business scaling is definitely something we talk about here. But there is more to Orly's background, which I think is very relevant for you, which is that she has a long background in lecturing and educating in entrepreneurship, comes out of a big family of entrepreneurs and is a daughter of an inventor, so has experienced and seen up close how innovation turns into business and then does or doesn't grow. Leadership today isn't just about scaling. It's about navigating constant uncertainty, market disruptions, and high-pressure decisions. If you're dealing with chaos, bottlenecks, and relentless pressure, welcome to the Business Emergency Room. Welcome.
That's the problem, isn't it? It's, an idea is one thing, but the key is, and this is, I actually love this, the difference between an entrepreneur and an inventor. An inventor comes up with a new product or new idea, but an entrepreneur turns it into a business. And my father was great at coming up with amazing products and very innovative, but the entrepreneurship part was a little bit more problematic, I would say. More challenging, which is true for so many entrepreneurs, right? I mean, it's really hard to scale and to sustain
transitions, right? Yeah. Transitions, scaling, making these step changes, and the changes and the differences in skill sets that are required, right? And we were talking earlier because sometimes it's not just the scaling because there's a step change needed or a different skill set. Sometimes the world also catches up to you as a business, right? Because you've simply been in business a long time and you have a great story in that space, right?
Yeah. So, it's one of my favorite stories of clients that I work with. So I rebranded a summer day camp, and they had been around since the 1950s. I worked with them in the early 2000s. And so they had been at one time the gold standard of summer day camps. But of course, what happened was, as you were saying earlier, the culture changed. Moms were no longer staying at home. We had two parents working. And so they were sending their kids earlier to camp. And so they were sort of at this crossroad of thinking that they needed to build like a mini camp for 4 or 5-year-olds, which, would have cost them like a great deal of money and would not have resulted in the outcome they wanted. Because when I did the pre-work, I did a lot of interviews. I read dozens of letters, and this camp was like really an amazing place. And what I discovered is, that this is really a place. First of all, it's a huge place. They have this huge lake. And so for 30 plus years, they had been messaging only about the lake, like everything, all their messaging, all their materials. Whenever they would do a tour, they talked about the lake. So the first thing I did when we started working together, I had them do an online survey. And this was really great. So one of the questions on the survey was, what's the number one reason you send your children here? And they had something like 100 people responded. So they had really good response rate. And out of the 100 people, guess how many people said the lake? One person. One person said the lake. It turns out that was not why people send their kids there. They send their kids there because their children learn to be independent and self-sufficient, and they learn how to swim. They have an amazing swim program. And then the other piece, which I also thought was so funny, we also asked them, what do you think about the logo? Now, remember, they'd had the logo for 30 plus years. It had been updated, but it was all around the lake. And when we asked people, what do they think about the logo? People literally said, what logo? So they couldn't see it. They couldn't, it was just like invisible. And so they went from, and at that time, they were having trouble. They still had spots in July. So when I helped them kind of reimagine really who they were about, it turns out that this is the place where small kids do big things.
Yeah.
And once
that's a nice slogan. Yeah.
Thank you.
But so much to unpack in this story, right? Because it's intriguing. There is quite a lot of businesses that are successful for quite a long time, and then the world evolves, and then they're no longer. And your example of then businesses not actually realizing what some of the successful ingredients were, or the ingredients that facilitated their success, what they really are and what they think they are, and it not aligning. And so then it almost feels as if the success is even more staggering, right? And that if they would have been tuned in even better to what their successful factors were,
yes,
where could they have been? Which is not how you want to look at your business, right?
No, and the fact of the matter is, I saved them probably $100,000 in not building this new camp, because it also turns out, this is something else about summer camps, is kids make their decisions. Usually they start at 6. By age 8 or 9, they're never going to move. This is where they're going to be. So they were thinking of like, oh, from 4 to like 14. No, 6 to 9 was really, that's their sweet spot. And what was really interesting about it, because families were sending multiple children, the younger child now got to see the older child and aspire to go there, which is so different from just trying to push something through. Like, that is just, it's not going to happen. No. And by the way, just so you know that there is a business outcome to this. Before the rebrand, they still had spots open in July. After the rebrand, they were booked by March.
Oh, wow. So made a big difference. Yeah. And so the moral of the story is that if you enlist the right expert and the right expertise, right, you can climb out of these situations. But two, also, I hear very much the need to take a pause, right? If you're in a panic, so I'm glad they enlisted help, because that's always hurdle number one, right? Admitting that you need help and then finding the right specialist. But then also taking a pause, right? Coming up with a knee-jerk plan is seldom a successful basis for a pivot, right?
Well, what's interesting about this particular story is they didn't pivot. What they did is they went back to basics. Like, why were they here? And when I said, earlier, I read, literally dozens of letters, and people said, this place made me a better person, a better husband, a better employee. I mean, it was amazing. I mean, like, literally tear-jerking,
Yeah, the value in all that is immense, no?
So when I started helping them to really think about that, they said, well, every summer camp does it. I said, yes, but every summer camp isn't messaging on that.
No. So actually, great for you. Great for pointing that out, right? That they went back to their current strategy. And I often see that when businesses are trying to make decisions in these situations where things are not working, that the scenarios they put on the table to choose between are all quite drastically different from the current approach. But the current approach or the current state is also a choice you can make, right? So going back to the path you're on and then fixing that one. I'm not saying that if the current path is not working for you, that you continue on the current path with all the same tools.
Obviously. But the thing that you really want to think about is that the reality is that you've already got the secret sauce, but so often it gets buried over time, especially long-standing brands. They start to think, oh, that they're doing something wrong. And often, because then the competition happens and they think, oh, I have to do this because the competition is doing this. And the reality is, if you go back to who you are and really own that space, that's what makes you unique in the first place, right? I mean, they do have a huge lake. I don't even know how many acres it is, but the lake wasn't the the message wasn't the lake. The message was how children learn to navigate the lake, to grow as children and become more self-sufficient and have more self-esteem.
Yeah,
So,
and the lake is
yeah.
probably the facilitator to the great swimming program, but has no identity
Exactly.
or personality or
Right. And it's just a lake, it's just a lake. So,
regardless how beautiful it may be.
and it is beautiful. Well, that was the other thing, because this place is this camp is in Northeast Pennsylvania. They were trying to compete with Maine. Okay, let me just, for those of you who don't know this, Maine is literally like the number one vacation land in the country. It is known to be incredibly beautiful. You cannot compete with Maine in that way. Yeah. But Maine wasn't talking about these children, gaining self-assurance and all of that. Yeah. So that was the other thing, is compete where you can compete, but don't compete where you're not competitive.
Yeah, I want to go back to the comment you made earlier about looking at what others are doing, because I often talk about the fact that it's not wise to be a copycat. Because you don't know what the drivers are of somebody else's business or where they're trying to go. So following them blindly because they seem to be confident in their path doesn't mean that by you doing the same thing, you will be successful and hence will feel that confidence too, right? But being a smart thief and stealing smart ideas from others or replicating, right? They're not really stealing, but replicating smart things that others do, but translating them to your business and your space, that can be a good strategy, right? And knowing what your competitor does is also relevant in terms of seeing where you fit in and what your niche is and highlighting what sets you apart from the competition, of course. Right?
Well, what sets you apart is that's your core value. Yeah. And what tends, the core values have gotten kind of a bad rap because, especially corporations, they tend to use them like stickers. Oh yeah, we're great at customer service. Yeah, we're great. Well, you know what? If customer service is not literally baked into your DNA, that's just a way you do business. Because let's face it, if you had terrible customer service, you wouldn't have customers.
It's like everybody using 50 hashtags, right? Only the first 3 are maybe really pertinent to this specific story or business. They cannot be all equally relevant or important.
And the way I like to explain core value, it's the thing that your business would do even if it was illegal to do it. It's not about running your business. It's about who you are at your core, kind of what is driving the business.
You can't help it.
You can't
almost. Yeah. So talking about some of these pivots and changes, do you see, because the example you gave was a business needing to change because the times had changed and it kind of gradually caught up till it got to a point where it's like, if we don't do something now, then we don't have a business. There's also a much faster paced change, right? Or change of a more crisis style nature. So a very sudden legislation or something else that kind of suddenly drives you for the need to change. Do you see a difference in how that goes about or how you would go about it in the way that the changes come about? Or does it matter where what's driving the need to change in how you would go about coming to solutions?
Well, a great example is what's happening with AI, right? I mean, there's a new tool. Look, when the World Wide Web happened, a lot of business died because they could not switch from, the brick and mortar onto an online platform. So I think AI is still too new. So I don't really know yet nobody really knows where it's going yet. But there was a technology, I think, is driving a lot of the changes. One of the things to remember is, there are jobs today that did not exist 30 years ago. And there will be jobs in 30 years that don't exist now. So there's also, so things are changing so rapidly, both on the technology front, on the cultural front, as we, as consumers, become more adept at navigating things like being on Zoom and selling all of our products online. That's a very different animal than when people used to read circulars, if you remember those, and they would come to a store with a newspaper, and look for those bargains. Like, that's just, that whole concept is completely gone. And with another big change that's happened is it used to be that the stores had all the power, but now it's really the consumers, because we have access 24/7 to all your competitors, right? So we can do the research and find out both what we want and then look at competitive pricing. So you have to start looking at something besides pricing. And I think when we were more in the brick and mortar, you could get people in the door on pricing. Now it's not about that. It's really about experiential design. It's about getting people to engage with your brand. That's where social media comes in, right? Access, and then using storytelling as a way to get people to join your community, right? So it's really shifted very much from transactional to relation.
So what I'm hearing you say is, from where you sit, there is a thing around technology development, for instance, where as a business, you either adapt or you can't, and that's the make or break to many a business. But that's something that all businesses need to deal with. One, two, that it's not just the technology, but it's also means that there is the drivers of your business partners, if you're business to business, or your consumers, the drivers that they have, and hence how they interact with you, changes over time. And I think your camp story is an example of that. And so that needs to be reflected in how you adapt and change. But then bringing it back to the work you do, Orly, does that mean? I think I know the answer. The answer to the core value piece, or who you are, or your core identity, doesn't change. But does that mean you then need to change also the way you communicate that, or does it affect your positioning even if your core identity doesn't change? Does it affect your positioning because the world around you changes?
So that's a really good question. I would say I think it's a different. I would ask a different question, which is really the world has changed, and people access information differently, or they access our products differently. We have to stay current to what the norm is. So for instance, yes, your core value doesn't change, but how you communicate it would change. I mean, before social media, before apps, I mean, who had ever heard of anything, right? I mean, and you have to remember the iPhone's only been around since 2007. So we're not talking that long, but it seems like it's been here forever. And so the piece that's important here is to respond to what is happening in terms of how people access both information and how they make decisions. And I think that piece, how we make decisions about who we want to buy from, that's really shifted a great deal. And especially now you've got the Gen Zers, you've got different generations who also have had different experiences. So millennials now make up the majority of the workforce. Gen Zers are right behind them. And what's interesting about Gen Zers is that they will leave a place. They will not work someplace if it doesn't align with their values. I mean, they are really serious about that. I mean, so all of a sudden, your values actually matter. I think they mattered less, 50 years ago, because people bought, it was more transactional.
It's more what you had to provide, and not from which moral platform or ethical platform you were maybe providing such.
Right. I mean, there's the growth of all the B Corps and, sustainable companies. And, that did not exist 30 years ago.
No, and I don't know. I think that movement was there in the business to business space too. I see it moving backwards a little bit. I think it had a peak. It's not quite at a peak currently in the way it works, but I do think that apart from more the moral or ethical values that companies also use to distinguish themselves, I think from an identity perspective, I know from an identity perspective, regardless of what drives the need for you to make a bit of a pivot or to re-clarify where you're going and what your focus is and what you're doing, 9 out of 10 cases of the clients I work with in the business to business space, that also results in external, the need to address external communication, and even if it's reconfirming that you're still on the same course, because people forget that if you have turmoil internally, your business partners, your suppliers, your clients, everybody experienced that with you. So the fact that you are back on track, or that you've gone through the motions to get back on track or back on a better track, or are back in the saddle and confidently striding forward, that has been visible to people. And so they need that reassurance that you're still the same you, or are you the same you with an elevated or more modern jacket, or are you, they need to see that, and that communication is also very much needed in that business to business space.
Absolutely.
Even if nothing changed, huh?
Well, here's the interesting thing, because you mentioned external communication. So messaging has to be both internal and external, because your biggest asset are your people. And you know for a fact that if things aren't going well, people will complain about it, and you will hear about it, you will see it. And so that's why, you've also got to remember that you're not just messaging to potential customers, you're also looking at retention and attrition, right? And so you want to get the best people, and to draw the best people. This is what I'm saying, especially this new generation, where they look at what are the working conditions that are like? What, do they have a wellness program? I mean, wellness programs didn't even exist 20 years ago, but now it's a big deal, because it shows that you care about your employees.
Well, and the reason your partners or your business environment knows that you are going through turmoil is also your employees, right?
Absolutely.
Even if they're trying to be really respectful of what's going on and not air out the dirty laundry, there will have been little comments made here or there. And so, yes, your whole team and all your employees are also part of the messaging that ends up being outward, which they need to hear and believe, which is, for instance, we're still the same trustworthy, very reliable, high quality supplier of X. But now with a renewed emphasis on this, or with a extended offering in that space, or taking it into the data management era with some additional tools, or whatever it is that you've decided to do. They are your best messengers too, right? And they need to feel it to be able to work it and deliver against it, and for it to become the image that people see.
Well, they're your brand ambassadors, right? Yeah. So, and what happens is, again, back to this new generation, they will leave. In fact, most of them, it's not unheard of. I mean, I see, because I've seen a lot of resumes over the years where they're just there 18 months. 2 years is a long time, because of exactly that. And so having a way to constantly message or constantly communicate to your people the things you're doing that are both staying current to what's happening out there, while at the same time being authentic to their brand. So you don't want to suddenly be, having people rollerblading in the hallways. If, you have to also remember who you are. That's why understanding who you are at your core is so important, because even as things change around you, your brand fundamentally does not change. It just, there's updates, right? It's like software updates, but you don't necessarily throw everything out and start over, and you don't try to pretend to be someone you're not. And that's something back to the competitive thing, where competition, it doesn't mean that you need to do what they do. It means that you need to go back to who you are, and then find what differentiates you, so that you can compete from your perspective, in the industry, right? So without trying to be a copy of another competitor.
Yeah, and there is also the scenario, but that's a whole other topic, right? Where there's more like a marriage, right? So you're still you, but your business expands so significantly that there's another part being married into it, and then it takes some work to clarify. But part is that the part that's still theirs and how the joint, but that's a whole different subject. So Orly, I always learn from you. But the things that I take away from our conversation are around knowing who you are, but also very much knowing how you are seen, right? How you're being perceived, and really taking the time to get that information. What is it that you're doing for people? And are there actually gaps in your own self-perception versus the feedback from that? So taking the time to actually collect that information, and also taking a pause before you plan a course of correction, because it might not be right that
people we can appreciate this. We're all impatient, right? We all want the magic pill. We want to be able to, hit the ground running, 0 to 60, all of that. And the truth is, nobody changes because they want to. They change because they have to. But
it's the hope that you've identified the golden bullet solution, and then chasing after that, right? And it's helpful to do a bit more work to figure out what the solution may be, which brings me to you, because we also talked about finding the specialist resource, because they are out there. And so if after hearing you here in this episode today, Orly, people are like, I want to know more about Orly, or I want to connect with her, or maybe work with her, where do they go? Where do they find you?
So LinkedIn, there's only one Orly Zeewy on LinkedIn that I'm aware of. So you can find me there, or you can go to my website, zeewybrands.com, and I have a whole section about the different packages and kind of how I work with people. And also it's a place where you can buy my book, because I have my book, Ready Launch Brand, has been out for a few years, and I'm currently working on a second book.
Very good. And Zeewy is spelled ZEEWY.
Brands, BRANDS.
That's a lot of Scrabble points, really.
Too bad that proper names are not admissible in Scrabble.
I'm not a fan of games, but suddenly I'm thinking, wow, that's all the high number points. Well, thank you so much, Orly, for joining me today. Thank you for tuning in to the podcast, and I hope to have you back here next week, wherever you are listening. And thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
If decision-making in your business feels like a never-ending battle, I've got something for you. Join my free live webinar, Decision-Making Mechanics to Turn Chaos Around. It happens every third Tuesday at 2 p.m. Central. We'll tackle the real obstacles slowing you down. Register at thechaosgamesconsulting.com.